Ora Labora once existed in Huron County, Michigan. Today, almost nothing remains. No preserved downtown, no restored storefronts, no historic markers drawing tourists. Just land and a cemetery. If you're interested in documented Great Lakes history that most people have never heard of, subscribe before we begin, because Ora Labora wasn't a boomtown that slowly declined. It appeared, functioned, and then disappeared. In the late 1800s, Michigan's Thumb region was still being carved into farmland. Dense forests were cleared. Logging camps expanded. Small rural settlements formed wherever rail lines or sawmills made survival practical. Ora Labora was one of those settlements. It was never large. It did not have industry on the scale of Detroit or Saginaw. It existed quietly, serving the surrounding agricultural community. A post office operated there for a time. Families built homes. Children were born. Like many rural communities in Michigan during that period, it relied on proximity to timber, rail access, and local farming. But the conditions that create small frontier towns are often temporary. Logging operations move on. Soil fertility shifts. Transportation routes change. When the rail lines no longer favor a location, a town begins to shrink. Ora Labora did not experience a dramatic fire. It was not struck by a famous disaster. It simply began to thin. By the early 20th century, residents were leaving for larger towns. Schools consolidated elsewhere. Businesses closed. The post office shut down. Buildings were either dismantled, relocated, or left to decay. Wood structures in rural Michigan do not last long once maintenance stops. Weather, rot, and reuse erase them quickly. Within a generation, Ora Labora was no longer functioning as a town. But one part remained: the cemetery. Small rural cemeteries often outlast the communities around them. They remain because families still visit, because land boundaries protect them, because memory lingers there longer than commerce does. Ora Labora's cemetery is one of the only physical reminders that the town existed at all. Headstones mark lives tied to logging, farming, and the early settlement of Michigan's Thumb, surnames that once filled the area. Dates from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Children, parents, entire family plots. The cemetery is quiet, unassuming, but it confirms what records show. There was a town here. It had structure. It had community. And then it faded. Unlike larger ghost towns in the American West, Ora Labora does not offer dramatic ruins. There are no empty brick storefronts, no collapsing saloons. The disappearance was quieter than that. Fields reclaimed land where homes once stood. Roads shifted. Property lines absorbed what used to be a center. If you drive through the area today, you would not immediately know a town stood there. This is how many Midwestern communities ended. Not through catastrophe, through migration. Economic gravity pulled people toward rail hubs, manufacturing centers, and later toward cities tied to the auto industry. Rural depopulation in Michigan began earlier than many realized. When timber resources were exhausted in certain areas, mills closed. When better farmland opened elsewhere, families relocated. When transportation improved, isolation became unnecessary. Small towns that existed because of necessity became redundant. Ora Labora was one of them. There is something unsettling about a town that leaves so little behind. We often associate history with structures. When buildings remain, we believe the past is still visible. But when wood returns to soil and roads are rerouted, history becomes harder to see. Ora Labora is not surrounded by legend. There are no verified hauntings tied to it, no recorded curses or dramatic final events. Its story is economic, environmental, demographic, which may be more sobering than myth, because it means disappearance does not require spectacle. It requires time and movement. The cemetery stands as a boundary between presence and absence. Names remain. Dates remain. The town does not. In many ways, Ora Labora represents hundreds of rural settlements across Michigan that rose during expansion and vanished during consolidation. It reminds us that maps are temporary, that communities are conditional, that permanence is often assumed, not guaranteed. If you want more documented Great Lakes history, the towns that rose, the places that vanished, And the records that remain? Subscribe. Some places burn, some collapse, and some simply fade until only a cemetery remembers them.